The night was supposed to be like any other. The warm glow of candlelight flickered against the walls of a quiet suburban home, casting long shadows over framed wedding photos and neatly arranged furniture. But beneath the surface of this picture-perfect life, something sinister was brewing, something that would shatter the illusion of love and loyalty forever. David had always trusted his wife, Emily. He had built a life with her, carved out a future, in the very home where he now sat in silence, his mind unraveling a truth so painful it threatened to consume him whole. It started with a message, a simple, seemingly innocent text that popped up on Emily's phone late one evening while she was in the shower. David hadn't meant to invade her privacy, but something about the way she snatched the phone from his line of sight moments later, her expression carefully blank, sent a shiver down his spine. It was a gut feeling at first, an unshakable instinct that gnawed at him, whispering that something wasn't right. He brushed it off, convincing himself he was overthinking, until the signs became impossible to ignore. The late-night phone calls she took in hushed tones, the sudden weekend errands that stretched into hours, the way she avoided his gaze when he asked simple questions about her day. The final straw came when David stumbled upon a hotel reservation, tucked away in her email, a single night booked under a name that sent ice coursing through his veins. His own brother's. Heart pounding, breath shallow, he felt the ground beneath him crack, his world teetering on the edge of destruction. The betrayal was deeper than he ever could have imagined. But what happened next? No one could have predicted. David sat in the darkness of their bedroom, the dim glow of his laptop screen reflecting off his tense face. He stared at the hotel reservation, his mind racing through every possible explanation, each one worse than the last. Had it been going on for weeks? Months? Years? He thought back to all the times he had dismissed the nagging doubts, the little inconsistencies that now screamed at him in hindsight. The way Emily had suddenly started caring more about her appearance, the perfume that lingered on her clothes long after she returned home, the growing distance between them that he had chalked up to stress. And then there was his brother, Jason, charismatic, confident, always the life of the party. David had admired him once, maybe even envied him. But now, all he felt was a cold, seething rage. Could his own blood have betrayed him like this? The thought made his stomach churn. Still, there was a sliver of doubt, a desperate hope that maybe he was misunderstanding everything. Maybe there was another reason for the reservation, some innocent explanation he had yet to uncover. But deep down, he knew the truth, and it was eating him alive. Determined to find out more before confronting them, David began to watch Emily more closely. He paid attention to her movements, to the way she checked her phone when she thought he wasn't looking, to the excuses that were starting to sound rehearsed. He even found himself studying Jason, looking for signs of guilt, but his brother carried on as if nothing was amiss. If anything, Jason had been more present lately, stopping by their house unexpectedly, offering to help David with small tasks, joking around like they were still kids. It was almost as if he was trying to throw David off the scent, but instead, it only made him more suspicious. And then there was the money Emily had been withdrawing cash from their joint account, large amounts with no clear explanation. David tried to tell himself it could be anything, maybe a surprise for their upcoming anniversary, but his gut told him otherwise. He needed proof, something undeniable, something he could confront them with so they couldn't lie their way out of it. But just as he was beginning to put the pieces together, something happened that made everything even more complicated. Emily came home one night, visibly shaken, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. When he asked her what was wrong, she hesitated for a long moment before finally whispering, "Someone knows." David's heart pounded in his chest. Someone knew? Knew what? Was she talking about the affair? Or was there something even darker at play? He watched as she typed frantically on her phone, deleting messages almost as soon as they arrived, her face pale and panicked. Suddenly, this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about something far more dangerous. And David was about to find out just how deep this rabbit hole went. David felt the weight of Emily's words pressing down on him like a vice. Someone knew. But who? And what exactly did they know? His mind was a tangled mess of suspicion and half-formed theories. But one thing was certain: Emily was afraid. He watched her hands shake as she gripped her phone, deleting messages before he could catch a glimpse. His frustration mounted. If she had nothing to hide, why was she acting like this? He wanted to demand answers, to shake the truth out of her. But he knew if he pushed too hard, she'd shut down. Instead, he played along, pretending to be the concerned husband, nodding as she muttered something about a misunderstanding, about someone playing games. But David wasn't buying it. He waited until she went to bed, feigning exhaustion, before quietly retrieving her phone from where she had left it, charging on the nightstand. His heart pounded as he scrolled through her messages, but there was no sign of the frantic texts she had been deleting earlier. It was as if they had never existed. His frustration turned to dread. Someone was watching them. Someone was making sure the truth stayed buried. The next day, David decided to take matters into his own hands. If Emily wasn't going to tell him the truth, he'd find it himself. He went to the hotel where the reservation had been made, hoping to confirm his suspicions. But when he got there, the receptionist gave him a blank look. There was no record of Emily or Jason ever having booked a room. Confused, he pulled up the confirmation email he had found, but it was gone, completely erased from his inbox. It was as if someone had wiped away any trace of it ever existing. His pulse quickened. Was he losing his mind? Or was someone actively working against him? He thought back to Emily's fear, to the way she had whispered those words, "someone knows." But what if she wasn't just scared of getting caught? What if there was something bigger at play, something neither of them fully understood? As he walked out of the hotel, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A blocked number. Hesitantly, he answered. Silence. Then a low voice, distorted as if through a voice changer. "Stop looking, David. You won't like what you find." His blood ran cold. He turned instinctively, scanning the streets, searching for someone watching him. But the sidewalk was full of strangers, none of them paying him any attention. His stomach twisted with unease. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. This was something else, something far more sinister. But David wasn't the type to back down. If someone thought they could scare him into stopping, they were dead wrong. What he didn't realize was that the deeper he dug, the more dangerous things would become. And by the time he uncovered the truth, it might already be too late. As David tried to steady his breathing, his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a blocked number, it was his sister Laura. He hesitated before answering, still rattled from the ominous call. The moment he picked up, her voice came through, low and urgent. "David, something's not right," she said. "I just got this weird email. No name, no subject, just 2 words, stop digging." His grip on the phone tightened. He hadn't told Laura anything yet, hadn't even mentioned his suspicions about Emily and Jason, let alone the eerie warning he had just received. So why was she being dragged into this? His mind raced, trying to piece it together. Laura had always been his closest confidant, the one person who had been there for him through everything. If someone was threatening her, this wasn't just about keeping him quiet. It was about cutting him off from the people he trusted. David told her to forward him the email, but when she tried, an error message popped up. "It's gone," she whispered. It just disappeared. His pulse pounded in his ears. Someone wasn't just warning them, they were watching, controlling what they could see, what they could prove. But who? And how? A chill crawled down his spine as a thought crept into his mind, one he didn't want to entertain, but couldn't ignore. What if it wasn't just Emily and Jason hiding something? What if there was someone else in his life, someone closer than he realized, who was manipulating everything from behind the scenes. The idea felt paranoid, absurd even, but after everything that had happened, he couldn't afford to dismiss anything. As night fell, David sat in his car outside his house, staring at the glow of the living room window. Emily was inside, moving around like everything was normal, like there wasn't a web of lies tightening around them. His phone buzzed again, and his heart clenched at the message that appeared on his screen. It was another unknown number, but this time there was an image attached. He clicked on it, and his stomach lurched. It was a photo of him taken that morning as he stood outside the hotel. The angle suggested it had been shot from across the street, meaning whoever sent it had been there, watching him the entire time. His hands trembled as he read the text beneath it. "Turn back, David. You have no idea what you're walking into." His blood ran cold, but his resolve hardened. Someone wanted him to stop. Someone was erasing evidence, silencing people, making sure the truth stayed buried. But instead of scaring him off, it only made him more determined. He had started this to find out the truth about his wife and brother, but now it was so much bigger than that. Someone was playing a dangerous game, and if he didn't figure out who, he might be the next piece to disappear. David barely slept that night. Every creak of the house sent a fresh wave of paranoia through his body. Every shadow outside his window felt like a figure lurking just beyond his sight. The warning messages, the erased email, the photograph of him outside the hotel, it all pointed to something bigger, something more dangerous than just a case of infidelity. He couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just uncovering a personal betrayal, but something much darker, something that could cost him more than just his marriage. By morning, exhaustion weighed on him, but the fear never left. He needed answers. He needed proof. He decided to start with Jason. If his brother was at the center of this, if Emily was really carrying his child, then Jason would have no choice but to admit it. David drove to his brother's apartment, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly, his knuckles turned white. But as he pulled into the parking lot, a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. Something was off. Jason's car was there, but the front door to his apartment was wide open, swinging slightly in the morning breeze. David hesitated, scanning the area. The silence was unnatural. No music, no sound of a TV, nothing. He stepped out of his car cautiously, every nerve in his body on edge. He pushed the door open further, stepping inside. The place was a mess, papers scattered, furniture knocked over, and a half-eaten meal sitting untouched on the counter. It didn't look like a robbery. It looked like someone had been looking for something. Or someone. Jason? His voice barely carried through the apartment. No answer. The bathroom door was open, the bedroom empty. But when he reached the living room, his heart stopped. A smear of blood stained the edge of the coffee table. Not much, but enough to make his stomach churn. His brother wasn't here, and there were no signs he had left willingly. A million thoughts raced through his mind. Had Jason been attacked? Taken? Or had he been the one to run? And if so, from what? From who? The same person who had sent those messages, who had been watching David. David pulled out his phone, his hands shaking as he dialed Jason's number. Straight to voicemail. He swallowed hard, a cold sweat breaking out along his spine. He couldn't call the police, not yet. He had no proof of foul play, just a gut feeling and a trail of clues that made no sense. But one thing was clear, he wasn't just dealing with a cheating wife and a lying brother anymore. Someone was pulling the strings, keeping him in the dark while they stayed 2 steps ahead. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye, a single piece of paper on the floor near the couch, half crumpled like it had been tossed aside in a hurry. He picked it up and felt his blood run cold. It was a printout of an email, just a few short lines. He knows too much. Take care of it. No sender. No recipient. Just those chilling words. A sharp noise outside made him spin around. the sound of tires screeching against pavement. He rushed to the window, just in time to see a black SUV speeding away from the apartment complex. His heart pounded as realization sank in. Someone had been here. Maybe they still were. David backed away from the window, his mind racing. He was in serious danger. Jason was missing. Someone was watching him, warning him, trying to control him. And now, for the first time since this nightmare began, he truly understood this wasn't just about his marriage anymore. This was about survival. David's mind was a battlefield of scattered thoughts and rising panic as he sped away from Jason's apartment. His brother was missing. Someone had been inside that place before him, and the message he found, "He knows too much. Take care of it," played on repeat in his head like a death sentence. The weight of it crushed his chest with every passing second. But there was something else, something gnawing at him, something he had overlooked. The SUV that peeled away from the apartment complex, it felt familiar. Not just any black vehicle, but that black vehicle. The same one he had noticed outside his office a week ago. The same one parked down the street from his house 2 nights earlier. He had brushed it off as coincidence before, but now the pattern was undeniable. He wasn't just being watched, he was being followed. And whoever was behind it wasn't being subtle anymore. His first instinct was to go to Emily. If she had any part in this, if she knew where Jason was, she had to come clean. But another thought surfaced: what if she was in danger too? What if she wasn't the mastermind, but another pawn in whatever this was? He needed to see her, needed to know if she was safe, needed to demand the truth once and for all. He didn't call ahead. He couldn't risk warning her if she had something to hide. Instead, he drove straight home, his hands trembling on the wheel, adrenaline fighting exhaustion. But the moment he stepped through the front door, the world tilted on its axis. Emily stood in the living room, pale as a ghost, gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Tears streamed down her face, but there was something in her eyes beyond sadness, fear. Her whole body shook as she looked at him, and then, without a word, she turned her phone toward him. His stomach twisted as he read the message displayed on the screen. "You should have told him. Now it's too late." There was no name, no number. Just those words. Ice crawled up his spine as his gaze flicked back to Emily, his pulse hammering in his ears. "Told me what?" he demanded, his voice harsher than he intended. Emily's lips parted, but no words came out. Then she collapsed. David barely caught her before she hit the ground, his heart slamming against his ribs. He called her name, shook her, but her body was limp, her breathing shallow. Panic surged through him as he fumbled for his phone to dial 911, but just as he reached for it, his eyes landed on something he hadn't noticed before. A small, empty vial lay on the floor near the couch, its label ripped off, the faint scent of chemicals clinging to the air. His blood turned to ice. Had she taken something? Had someone given her something? His hands trembled as he lifted her, his mind racing. There was no time to think, no time to process. He had to get her help. As he carried her to the car, the truth hit him like a freight train. This wasn't about an affair anymore. This wasn't just about a betrayal between a wife and a husband, a brother and his blood. This was something else entirely, something deeper, something more calculated. Someone had been controlling the pieces of this game from the very beginning, and David had just been stumbling in the dark, thinking he was uncovering secrets when, in reality, he was walking straight into a trap. And now, the one person who might have had answers was slipping away in his arms. Everything he thought he knew was a lie, and the real mystery was only just beginning. David gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, his foot pressing the gas pedal almost to the floor as he raced toward the hospital. Emily lay unconscious in the passenger seat, her breathing shallow, her skin deathly pale. Every second that passed felt like a countdown to disaster. and the question that burned in his mind was unbearable. Had she done this to herself, or had someone done it to her? His gut screamed at him that this was no accident. Not after everything. Not after the threats, the messages, the vanishing evidence. Someone was tying up loose ends, and Emily was next on their list. His mind reeled with everything he knew, or thought he knew. The affair, Jason's disappearance, the cryptic messages. It had all felt so personal, so tangled in their own sins and betrayals. But now, the pieces weren't just scattered, they were being systematically erased. His brother, missing without a trace. His wife, barely clinging to life. And now, David himself, holding on to the one thing that felt real, his desperation to figure out what the hell was happening before it was too late. The moment he screeched to a halt in front of the emergency room doors, he threw the car into park and rushed around to pull Emily from the seat, carrying her inside as nurses and doctors rushed to meet him. Their voices blurred together in a storm of medical jargon and urgency, and before he could even process what was happening, Emily was wheeled away, disappearing behind a set of double doors that slammed shut in his face. He stood there breathless, helpless, hands shaking at his sides. And then his phone vibrated in his pocket. His stomach twisted as he pulled it out, already knowing it wasn't going to be good. The message was short, just like the others. She's only alive because we let her be. Stop digging, David. Or next time, you won't get the chance to save her. His blood ran cold. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. This was a warning. A final, brutal ultimatum. Walk away now, forget everything, and maybe Emily would survive. Keep pushing, keep unraveling the truth, and he wouldn't just lose her. He'd be next. His entire body tensed with the weight of the decision pressing down on him. If he stopped now, he could take Emily and disappear. Pretend none of this ever happened. Let the truth stay buried, wherever it was. But the rage in his chest burned hotter than the fear. Whoever they were, they had taken everything from him: his trust, his peace, his family. If he walked away now, he'd never be able to live with himself. He needed answers. He needed justice. But was he willing to pay the price? The phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a call. Unknown number. His breath hitched, his thumb hovering over the screen for a second before he finally answered. He didn't speak, just listened. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a voice low, calm, and eerily familiar. "Turn around, David." His heart nearly stopped. He spun on his heel, his pulse hammering. And there, standing in the shadows just outside the hospital entrance, was Jason. His brother, the one he had thought was dead, the one who had disappeared without a trace. But there he was, very much alive. And the look in his eyes told David that whatever truth he was about to uncover, it was going to change everything. David's breath came in sharp, shallow bursts as he locked eyes with Jason, his mind struggling to catch up with the impossible reality in front of him. His brother was alive. Not missing, not dead, alive. But something in Jason's stance, in the eerie stillness of his expression, sent a cold shiver down David's spine. There was no relief in his face, no urgency, no desperation to explain why he had vanished. Just a calm, knowing stare, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Before David could move, Jason raised a hand, just a small, subtle motion, but enough to send two figures stepping out of the shadows behind him. Men dressed in dark suits, their presence radiating quiet authority, the kind of authority that didn't need to announce itself. A wave of nausea rolled through David's stomach as he realized he had been pulled into something far bigger than an affair, bigger than betrayal. This wasn't just about Emily. This wasn't just about Jason. It was never just about them. "Get in the car," Jason said, his voice calm but firm, as if there was no question about what would happen next. David hesitated, his entire body screaming at him to run, to fight, to do something, but the sharp metallic click of a gun's safety being flipped off cut through the night air like a warning bell. One of the men had a gun pressed low against his side, almost hidden, but not enough for David to miss it. His heart slammed against his ribs. He had no choice. His hands clenched into fists as he moved toward the black SUV parked near the curb, sliding into the back seat with Jason following close behind. The moment the door shut, the car pulled away from the hospital, taking David farther from Emily, from safety, from everything he thought he knew. Jason sat across from him, his expression unreadable. "You should have left it alone, David," he said finally, his voice quieter now, almost regretful. David's throat was dry, his mind racing. "What is this?" His voice was hoarse, raw with confusion and anger. "What the hell is going on?" Jason exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face, and for the first time, David saw something flicker in his brother's eyes: exhaustion, maybe even guilt. "I tried to protect you," Jason murmured. "Tried to keep you out of this. But you just wouldn't let it go." David's pulse pounded. "Protect me from what?" Jason hesitated, glancing toward the two men in the front seat. Whatever he was about to say, he knew it would change everything. "It was never just about Emily. It was never just about me. This goes deeper, so much deeper than you think. Emily's pregnancy wasn't an accident. It wasn't some tragic mistake. It was planned." David's stomach twisted violently. "What the hell are you talking about?" Jason's gaze darkened. "She was targeted, David. You were targeted. Everything that's happened, it wasn't random. It was orchestrated. And the people pulling the strings, they've been watching you for a long time." David felt like the air had been sucked from his lungs. "Who?" he demanded. Jason's jaw tightened. "The same people who made me disappear." The car swerved suddenly, and David barely had time to register the blinding headlights of another vehicle speeding toward them. The impact was immediate, brutal, a sickening crunch of metal and glass as the SUV flipped violently through the air. The world turned into chaos. Screeching tires, shattering windows, the weightless, terrifying sensation of being tossed like a ragdoll. Then, darkness. When David's eyes blinked open, his body screamed in pain, his head pounding. The SUV lay on its side, smoke curling from the engine. The driver and the armed man were motionless, either dead or unconscious. Jason groaned beside him, blood trickling down his forehead. And outside, stepping through the wreckage like a ghost, was a woman. Emily. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes locked onto David's with an intensity that made his blood turn ice cold. "Emily?" he rasped, his mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. She took another step closer, her face eerily calm. And then she spoke. "I told you to stop digging." And just like that, everything David thought he knew came crashing down. David's entire world felt like it had been flipped upside down. His body ached from the crash, but the pain was nothing compared to the war raging inside his mind. Emily stood before him, completely unharmed, her expression unreadable as the wreckage smoldered behind her. He couldn't process what he was seeing. The woman he had loved, the woman who had carried his child, was she the mastermind behind it all? Or was she just another pawn in a game he still didn't fully understand? Jason groaned beside him, coughing as he tried to push himself up. The two men who had been in the front seat of the SUV were still motionless, blood staining the broken glass around them. David knew he had seconds to act, to demand the truth, before it slipped through his fingers once again. Emily took another step closer, her heels crunching against the shards of glass scattered across the pavement. The flickering glow of a distant street lamp cast eerie shadows across her face, making her unreadable, almost ghostly. "I warned you," she said softly, tilting her head. "I told you to stop." Her voice was calm, disturbingly so, as if she wasn't standing in the middle of a crime scene, as if she hadn't just emerged from the shadows like some phantom orchestrating everything from the very beginning. David's heart pounded so violently, he thought his ribs might crack under the pressure. He forced himself to his feet, using the twisted remains of the car to steady himself. His fingers trembled as he wiped the blood from his forehead, eyes never leaving hers. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, his voice raw with desperation. "I deserve the truth." Jason let out a dry, bitter laugh from the ground, shaking his head as he finally sat up. "Oh, you still think you're owed that?" he rasped, glaring at David through swollen eyes. "You think the truth will make this better?" His laughter faded into a harsh cough, and when he looked at Emily, something shifted in his gaze. "Just tell him, Emily. Stop playing with him. If he's come this far, he deserves to know." For the first time, something flickered across Emily's face: hesitation. But it was gone just as quickly as it had appeared. She sighed, as if she was exhausted, as if she was the one who had been betrayed. "It was never about love, David," she finally said, her voice void of the warmth he had once known so well. "It was never about you." The words struck him harder than any physical blow. His stomach turned, nausea rising in his throat. "What?" His voice was barely above a whisper. Emily glanced at Jason, then back at David. The pregnancy, the affair, all of it, it was planned. Every single moment. You were chosen. The world tilted, and for a second, David thought he might collapse. He shook his head violently, refusing to believe what he was hearing. "That doesn't make any sense," he said, his voice breaking. "Why? Why would you?" "Because you're not who you think you are," Jason interrupted, his tone sharp, almost pitying. "And neither am I." A deafening silence fell over them. David's breath hitched in his throat. The weight of Jason's words pressed down on him like an avalanche, suffocating, unbearable. His hands curled into fists, his knuckles turning white. "What does that mean?" he choked out, his mind racing through every possible scenario, every secret that had been kept from him. But deep down, in the darkest corners of his mind, he already knew. Jason exhaled slowly. "It means we were never really brothers." David's heart stopped. The world around him seemed to shrink, to blur, to dissolve into nothingness. The memories of their childhood, their bond, their fights, and their reconciliations, it all suddenly felt like a lie, like a carefully crafted illusion, designed to keep him from seeing the truth. His legs felt weak, his chest tightening with something deeper than betrayal. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not." Emily took another step forward, her eyes filled with something David couldn't quite name. "You were part of something bigger," she said, her voice almost gentle now. "A long-term experiment. A test. Your entire life, your job, your relationships, even your family was controlled, manipulated. To see what you would do. To see how you would react. And now," she tilted her head slightly, "now we have our answer." David's entire body turned ice cold. His breath came in short gasps as the pieces finally clicked together, as the horrifying truth unspooled before him like a sick, twisted film he had been forced to star in. He staggered back, shaking his head violently, his vision blurring with rage, with fear, with something he couldn't even name. "You're lying," he snarled, his voice cracking. "You're both lying." Jason's expression softened, but there was no joy in it. No malice either, just resignation. "I wish we were," he murmured. The distant wail of sirens cut through the night air, but David barely registered it. The final piece of evidence, the one undeniable truth, was standing right in front of him. Emily, the woman he had trusted, the woman he had loved, had never been real. And now, as the sirens grew louder, as Jason stared at him with something that almost resembled regret, David realized something else. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The sirens had faded, swallowed by the restless hum of the city. but the chaos they left behind was still unraveling in David's mind. He sat on the edge of the hospital bed, bandages wrapped around his ribs, his reflection staring back at him from the darkened window. He barely recognized himself. His face was swollen, bruised, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. The past few hours had been a blur of police questioning, medical tests, and the suffocating realization that nothing in his life had ever been real. Jason was gone, whisked away by men in suits who offered no explanations, no reassurances, just a cold, lingering glance before they vanished into the night. And Emily. She had disappeared before the authorities arrived, as if she had never existed at all. The only proof she had ever been there was the wreckage, the blood on his hands, and the words that echoed in his head like a haunting lullaby. You were chosen. Your life was an experiment. The weight of those words settled deep in his chest, heavier than any physical injury. He thought back to his childhood, to the fights and laughter he had shared with Jason, to the moments that had defined who he was. Were those memories even his? Or had they been planted, scripted to guide him towards some invisible goal? The idea made his stomach turn. How many times had he thought he was making choices, believing he had control over his own fate, when in reality he had been nothing more than a puppet on a string? His hands clenched into fists, nails digging into his palms. He wanted answers, but every door he had once trusted had been slammed shut. The company he had worked for, the people he had once called family, all of it, had been tainted by this revelation. He had no idea where to go, who to turn to, or if the truth would ever fully come to light. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts, and when he looked up, a nurse stood hesitantly in the doorway, holding an envelope. "This was left for you," she said gently, her expression unreadable. David reached for it with unsteady hands, his pulse quickening as he recognized the elegant handwriting on the front. Emily. He swallowed hard, hesitating for only a second before tearing it open. A single photograph slipped out, landing face up on his lap. His breath caught in his throat. It was a picture of him and Jason, except it wasn't. It looked like them, same eyes, same posture, but the details were wrong. The clothes were outdated, the background unfamiliar, and the expressions on their faces. They weren't the boys he remembered. These weren't childhood memories. This was something else. His eyes darted to the note beneath the photograph, written in Emily's neat, deliberate script. "David, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. You were never meant to know the truth. But you always had a choice, even when they tried to take it from you. Now the choice is yours. If you want to disappear, burn this and walk away. Live the life you have left. But if you want to know everything who you really are, follow the address on the back. Just know that once you do, there's no turning back. Whatever you think you know, it's only the beginning." David turned the photo over with trembling fingers. There, scribbled in small, precise letters, was an address in a city he had never been to. His heart pounded as he stared at it, knowing this was the moment. The final choice. He could let it go, pretend he had never received this message, try to rebuild something from the wreckage of his stolen life. Or he could walk straight into the unknown, into the heart of the conspiracy that had shaped him without his knowledge. The wind rattled against the hospital window, and for the first time in what felt like forever, David let out a slow, steady breath. He had spent his entire life playing a part in someone else's story. But this was his decision. No more manipulations, no more hidden hands pulling the strings. Whatever was waiting for him beyond that address, he would face it on his own terms. As he stood, slipping the letter into his jacket, he cast one last glance at his reflection. He still didn't recognize the man staring back at him, but maybe he was finally about to.